All right, I want to welcome you to the webinar called Create Your Own Curriculum. My name is Alan White, and I'm going to be sharing some things with you today. Some of you know me, some of you maybe don't know me, so let me take a minute to introduce myself. I have been a pastor for over 25 years, which makes me sound really, really old. My wife Tiffany and I have been married for 16 years, actually on April the 8th, so it's coming up very quickly. I have 4 children, two sons, 14 and 10, a daughter who's 8, and a baby boy who is 2. And so that's kind of an interesting thing when you're 51 years old to have a 2-year-old, but he's a lot of fun. My 2 older boys have some special needs, so our house is kind of a challenge, but that's how it goes. In the last 11 years, I have coached over 1,500 churches in all parts of North America, and in recent years have had the privilege of doing a little bit of coaching in other parts of the world, not over GoToMeeting like this, not so much in person, not that I wouldn't like to travel. In the last, or since 2011, I have helped churches start over 14,000 small groups. That's not 14,000 people in groups, that's 14,000 groups. And last year, I worked with 18 churches, and those 18 churches started just over 5,000 groups, which means that the average church out of that bunch started 277 groups. And some of those were large churches, some of those were not as large. And we're actually getting to a scenario with a lot of churches where they have more people in groups than they have in their weekend attendance by far. So what do? I work with churches through individual coaching, coaching groups, online courses, my book, which is going to come out in January of next year, and also at my blog, which is alanwhite.org, that you probably have seen at some point. I have also worked in producing video curriculum, writing, directing. A few years ago, actually 3 years ago at Easter, Gene Apple at Eastside Christian Church in Anaheim, California, we did a series called Hope Rising. And Gene actually, his church launched 460 groups off of Easter Sunday that year. Worked with Dr. Tony Evans from Oak Cliff Bible Fellowship in Dallas, Texas, and did a curriculum based on his book Destiny. So video and a study guide to go along with that. Dr. Evans recruited 500 people in his church to lead groups for the first time. At Seacoast Church, where Greg Surratt is the founding pastor, Josh Surratt is the lead pastor down in, they're actually all over South Carolina, but mainly in the Charleston area, did a curriculum called I See a Church, casting vision for the next 25 years of their church. Seacoast is about 12,000 people on the weekend. And with the I See a Church program or curriculum, they connected 94% of 12,000 people into groups. I've also done curriculum for those of you in Chicago, your neighbor, Wilfredo de Jesus, more popularly known as Pastor Choco at New Life Covenant in Chicago, did a curriculum in English and Spanish for his book called In the Gap with a publisher called My Healthy Church. I've also worked with the Association of Related Churches, the ARC. These are just a few samples of things. I've been in more of these things than maybe I care to admit. Also created the downloadable discussion guide for intentional parenting for Doug and Kathy Fields. Doug was the student pastor at Saddleback for 18 years. He's currently on staff at Mariners Church as a teaching pastor. He does some work with family ministry through his website and also through Azusa Pacific University. I was also involved in the team that created the Daniel Plan with Rick Warren. We created the DVD and study guide to go along with the book. And there's a very bad picture, but I'm in the picture right underneath the light. And this picture revealed to me that, yes, I was the fat guy at the Daniel Plan shoot, which is not a really good feeling. And so what I did was I looked at this picture and I thought, I need to get with it. So I started doing the Daniel Plan and I lost 38 pounds. And this is not what this webinar is about, but it was pretty amazing. But it's kind of cool because just a lot of the different interviews that we did and just showing up in different places, including in the Daniel Plan book, which ended up being Book of the Year last year in the United States for Christian publishers. And if you look carefully there in the circled area, there is a an acknowledgement for one Alan White and his participation in the curriculum. So that was a fun project to work on. Lately, I've been doing work with Chip Ingram. Chip Ingram's pastor of Venture Christian Church in Los Gatos, California, which is the heart of Silicon Valley. And also, Chip has a national ministry called Living on the Edge. And it's been a pleasure to work with him. I've helped with, did a curriculum called Holy Ambition. This was actually the shoot for that. Based on his book. We did another curriculum called Discover Your Design about helping people find their gifts and their calling, their passions for ministry. And then in addition to that, have recently developed a new membership curriculum for their church. Now, out of the first curriculum, Holy Ambition, we launched last fall, Venture Christian started 400 new small groups in addition to the 120 current small groups that they had. Now get this, this is a church of 2,200 adults, and last fall they had 520 groups. So that's significant because we're seeing that more and more. Now, projects like this can cost anywhere in the range of $25,000 to $75,000 to produce if you hire someone to create curriculum for you. And this is not necessary. I believe that you have the resources in your own church to create amazing and effective curriculum. Now, when you signed up for the webinar, I asked what kind of issues that you were facing. And in general, these are some things that came out of where you're feeling the pain right now. For some of you, it's in creating groups. For others, it's engaging new Christians in groups, promoting groups and connecting new people to groups, strategy and planning for a group launch, measuring group health, and developing sermon-based groups, and then developing short-term groups. And we're going to cover a lot of these topics today. If we don't get to your topic today, then we can do a little in the question and answer at the end, or we can just email back and forth. Would be great. So what we're going to cover today is this: reasons for creating curriculum, engaging your senior pastor in this process. If you are the senior pastor, then it's engaging yourself, I suppose. Team roles for producing curriculum. Who do you need in order to create your own curriculum? Timeline for your project, successfully launching your study, because you create the curriculum, you want to see it go somewhere, right? So we'll cover all of these as well as a few other things. Now, as we start, what I'd like to do is share with you a bit of my own journey. And if you've been on other webinars, then just indulge me. I'm going to give a little different spin to my story, but it is the same story. But the fact that my story is consistent should be, meaningful to some of you, that I'm not like making things up. But as I share my own story, I think maybe it might resonate with you and kind of your own journey and what you're facing and maybe need to try in your own church as far as developing curriculum. So my journey was this. I graduated from seminary in 1990 and ended up at a church in Northern California in a town called Turlock in the Central Valley, New Life Christian Center. And at the time, this was a church of about 300 adults. And so I was there for about a year and a half, and some things came to light about our founding pastor, and he had to resign. And so our congregation of 300 very quickly dwindled down to 85 people, and I was the only staff member left with these 85 people. And on the very last Sunday of 1992, our new pastor was voted in, and at the time, Pastor Dave was 30 and I was 28, and to say that we were green was an understatement. And so that next year in 93, he took me down to Orange County, California, to hear a guy I had never heard of before talk about this thing called the Purpose-Driven Church, and that would be Rick Warren, which is kind of funny to think that back then I didn't even know who Rick Warren was. But what I remember at the time was we were so filled with vision, but we came back and looked at our 85 people, and we thought, how in the world are we going to be able to start ministries and form groups and do all of these things? Now, our church didn't grow dramatically. I mean, I see churches now that just double overnight. Our family is part of New Spring Church here in South Carolina, and I haven't heard the number yet, but I do know that 1,244 people prayed to receive Christ in the services for Easter this year. And it's pretty phenomenal. Normally, there's about 40,000 people on the weekend. But our church didn't grow dramatically. We grew about 100 a year, and when I left 12 years later, we were at about 1,500. Currently, they're at about 3,200 or something like that. But as we saw the church growing, we had to embrace a principle that we gained from Rick Warren, and he said that a church needs to grow larger and smaller at the same time, in that larger numerically in the services and then smaller as people are connected into small groups where, people know each other. And you guys are all, I preach into the choir here. So we developed our plan for small groups and how we were going to start with 10 groups, and everybody was going to develop an apprentice. And then that apprentice would launch a new group in the second year, and we'd get some more. And, by the end of 5 years, we'd have everybody connected into groups. As the church continued to grow, it would all work. Now, unfortunately, with this plan, it wasn't all up and to the right. In fact, we had some ups, we had some downs, we had some good years, we had some bad years. Some years we launched 10 groups, some years we launched 2 groups, some years we launched 0 groups, and the thing had a heartbeat. You were waiting for that, weren't you? But it wasn't what we thought. Well, we got 7 years into our 5-year plan, and we realized that we were stuck. We were completely stuck. And I went down to Orange County again and met this guy named Brett Eastman, who had been the small group pastor at Saddleback Church, and prior to that was on the small group team at Willow Creek in Chicago with Bill Hybels. And he had developed a ministry called Life Together. And I heard him cast vision about how you could multiply groups without dividing them, and ways to start new groups, and ways to use video curriculum. And I got excited about it, but I thought, this is something to think about, but I'm just not sure how this is going to work in my church. So on the drive home, I began to contemplate, what is my senior pastor focused on right now? Where could we make some kind of connection with groups? How could we get this started? And this was back in 2004. And so I began to think about this. And in 2004, what was on my senior pastor's mind was the Passion of the Christ. He had already planned a sermon series to coincide with the release of the movie. He'd already planned advertising in the community to draw people in, knowing that people would have spiritual questions after they saw the movie. And so I walked into his office and I said, Pastor Dave, I said, what if we launched small groups off of the Passion of the Christ? And he said, I think that's a great idea. Now, and of course, I piggybacked on his idea because I've been an associate pastor for a long time. I'm no dummy. And so I said, here's the thing. Now, the next part, I can't really verify whether this was legal, but we'll just leave it at that. I said, I found a study guide for groups about the Passion of the Christ, but we really need to have a video to make it easy for anybody to use. Now, we purchased the study guides. We didn't copy the study guides, and there was no other video for it. So maybe we were okay. We just didn't ask. But anyway, I said, we need to do a video, and we need to have you on the video. And he consented to do that and to make these videos so it'd be easier for people to use. So I used my home video camera and captured the video. We shot the video on the stage in our church because that was the best lighting that we had, right? And our teleprompter, we had a music stand underneath my home video camera with pieces of paper on it that we had blown up on the copy machine with his bullet points so he knew where he was in the outline. That's how we made curriculum. And then we output it to a VHS tape. We were 1 week ahead of the groups. We didn't do 6 all at once and then have them ready to roll out on a DVD. We were a week ahead because we had decided to do this 3 weeks before the series started. So every week outside of my office, we had this videotape exchange where the leaders would come. They would give me last week's tape. I would give them this week's tape, and then I would take last week's tape to the duplicator, and it would become next week's tape. And we did this for 6 weeks in a row. It was a little bit crazy, but here was the key. When my pastor stood up on a Sunday morning and he said, we've prepared these materials for you on the Passion of the Christ, and if you would be willing to open your home and host a group, we'll help you get your group started. And we doubled our groups in 1 day. Now, bear in mind, it had taken 7 years to get to the place where we were, and we doubled our groups in a day. Now, after Easter that year, we launched a second series. And then in the fall of that year, we launched a third series. And by the time we got to fall, we had 125% of our average adult attendance attending groups. And then we turned around in January of 2005 and had the same number of 120, or same percentage of our people connected into groups. Now, that isn't funny pastor math. Part of it is when you go by your average Sunday attendance, not everybody attends every week. Some people attend, every other week or once a month or once every 6 weeks or Christmas and Easter or whatever. So we were going by our average Sunday attendance. But the other thing that happened was we saw people using these videos and using this curriculum in break rooms at work. Recently working with churches, one church in Redmond, Washington, and there's a group that meets in the middle of the Microsoft cafeteria, which, believe it or not, is kind of a risky thing for them. Have, the church in Silicon Valley, groups meeting at Google, which again, that's kind of a bold move because that's not really looked upon in a friendly way. But break rooms at work, coffee shops. I even had one group that met on a commuter train. And it was really outstanding to see. Once you gave people permission, once you gave them opportunity to be creative, it was interesting to see all of the ways that they did this. Now, kind of speeding up my story a little bit, the second church I worked with is here in Greenville, South Carolina, is Brookwood Church. It was a church of about 6,500 people, and we did multiple series, some with our senior pastor doing the teaching, some with the senior pastor would do the first session, and then the other pastors would do different sessions. We had one where it was about health in general, kind of a holistic health approach. And we had experts. We had a psychologist, we had a nutritionist, dietitian on there, as well as some of our staff lending a hand. And we started, hundreds of groups at a time. I know one series we started over 300 groups, and we already had a couple hundred groups. So it's been really interesting to see the dynamic of how video-based curriculum has helped. And we're going to get into some of the nuts and bolts in a minute, but I'm going to tell you about a couple of churches that I've worked with in the past several years. I started working with Van Dyke Church about 5 years ago. Van Dyke is a great United Methodist church in the Tampa, Florida area. The church of about 1,800 adults. And when I started with them, they had 400 adults in groups. We produced a curriculum. Now, our team coached them, and their team did all of the work in the production. And the first series, round one, if you will, they went from having 400 adults in groups to 1,000 people in groups. This was the fall of 2011. Then in the new year of 2012, they went from having 1,000 in groups, with their second series got to 1,600 in groups. And then in round three, which was after Easter in 2012, they had over 2,000 people in groups, and they had 1,800 people still as regular attenders in their church. New Life Church in Renton, Washington, Great Assemblies of God Church, Pastor Troy Jones there in the picture. It's a church of 2,500 adults. When I went to work with them, they had 100 groups already. We produced curriculum. We did one full production for them, and then they did the second curriculum on their own. We added some new strategies to how they were connecting people into groups, how they were forming groups, how they were recruiting leaders. And this church added 400 groups to the 100 groups they already had. So a church of 2,500 with 500 groups, and their goal is 1,000 groups. And I need to check in with Pastor Troy and see where they're at. Dr. Tony Evans, I mentioned earlier, Oak Cliff Bible Fellowship in Dallas. They created their own curriculum. You had to be a member in order to host a group. They have 7,000 members, so we didn't have a problem. Dr. Evans stood up. He did a message on community on Labor Day weekend, and I thought, oh, no. I didn't know he was going to do Labor Day weekend. And it's the big holiday end of summer. For those of you from Poland and South Africa on the call, it's usually a very low weekend in attendance. And so he preached a sermon on community on Labor Day weekend and recruited 260 people to lead groups. So now I'm thinking maybe Labor Day is not so bad. When it was all said and done, they had 500 new leaders to lead groups. And then, of course, I told you a little bit ago about Chip Ingram and his church in Silicon Valley, and he had some nice things to say about me. I'm not going to read it because it embarrasses me, okay? But we had a great start to launching groups in their church. All right, so let's talk about kind of the significance of curriculum. Some of you have done this already, and that is an alignment series where the group study goes with the weekend message. Now, there are a variety of ways of doing this. You don't have to do it exactly like this. I do feel like it's more significant to have your groups using your curriculum rather than anybody else's curriculum. Now, I know someone earlier said they were about to do 40 Days of Purpose for the first time. That's a great one. I would wholeheartedly recommend that one. But over anybody else, your people are more interested in hearing your teaching because they know you, they like you, otherwise they wouldn't be there. And so I think that you could do it aligned with a sermon series. You could create curriculum based on topics that you've had a sermon series in the past. You create a curriculum, put in a curriculum library to, just have a curriculum to launch that maybe isn't aligned with a weekend service. If that doesn't seem to fit the nature of your church, we've had some that the pastor preached a first message related to the curriculum. They launched the groups, and then the group did the curriculum, and the pastor went on to other things. Some pastors don't speak in a series, so it's very difficult to get them to kind of agree to do this. But if you've never done this before, then typically on your first time out, in order to get the majority of your people connected into groups, you want to plan for 2 or 3 alignments in one ministry season. And I know that there are some on the call that have done this before, and hopefully they would amen this, because this helps with continuity. Because the reality is you could, develop a big program and promote it and, have a lot of people sign up to be a part of it and have a great 6 weeks. And then at the end of 6 weeks, you just watch the thing fall apart. And so what's great about doing a series of these is, say, let you do one this fall, or you're doing one right now. Then in the middle of the series that the groups are currently doing, the middle of that study, invite them to a second study and get them to decide whether or not they're going to move forward as a group before the first study ends. And that usually is a good way to get them to take that next step and to continue on. Now, if they don't like each other, then I would just tell them to go ahead and end their group immediately because, life is too short. Now, if you have done alignments before, then you probably just want to do one big church-wide campaign in the fall or in the new year, whatever is a good time for your church, and not, continually hit people up with church-wide campaigns. Otherwise, people develop a little bit of what I call campaign fatigue. The most important thing about launching groups in the church when you create your own curriculum is that your senior pastor becomes the small group champion. Now, how do you get that to happen? Well, first of all, you put your pastor on the curriculum because your pastor is going to be more interested. Van Dyke Church that I was talking about a little bit ago, the church in Lutz, Florida, their pastor is a great guy named Matthew Hartsfield. And we spent a whole day with his team shooting this video. And then the next day we walked into his office and he said, okay, so we've shot this video, we're developing this curriculum. Now, how do we recruit leaders and how do we get people connected into groups? And later in the day, the discipleship pastor came to me and he said, I've been trying to get my pastor interested in groups for the last 2 years. And he said, and you just did it. I said, I just smiled and said, well, I'm Alan White. And no, that's not what I said. But the reality was that the pastor had made an investment in the curriculum. So now the pastor was more interested in seeing this succeed and seeing groups get started and for his people to use the curriculum. Your people will be more interested if your pastor is on the curriculum. Because let's face it, other than Jesus Christ, the reason that people attend your church is because of your senior pastor, especially if they're not connected to each other. They like your pastor's personality. They like sense of humor. They like his jokes. They like his style. And now let me caution you here. Please don't say this to your worship pastor. It'll break his heart. But they connect with the senior pastor. So when the pastor stands up and says, just like Pastor Dave did, says, we've developed this material based on my teaching, well, you're giving your people more of what they already like. And so then the pastor gives them direction to gather some friends together and do a study. Well, that is a grand slam home run because people are going to follow that direction. The other thing you want to think about is to give small group solutions to your pastor's problems. And we are going to get to details about curriculum in a minute, I promise you. So what do pastors worry about? They worry about attendance, they worry about spiritual growth, closing the back door, outreach, and finances. And so groups can actually meet these needs. And I can tell you a lot of stories, but I'm not going to give you stories. I'm going to give you research. Eric Geiger and Ed Stetzer, Transformational Groups, Robert Wuth, now this is an older book called Sharing the Journey, talk about how small groups benefit other areas in the church and even especially the things pastors are worried about. So studies have shown that groups will increase connection, that people will be more connected in your church if they're in groups. They don't need to know everybody, but everybody needs to know somebody. They're going to increase spiritual growth. So you're going to have more people engaged in discipleship. And so what they're hearing it on Sunday, then they come together with their group, they discuss what was presented in the message and how to apply it to their lives. It's going to increase attendance. If you have a study, if it's aligned with the sermon series, people are going to want to be there on Sunday to hear the sermon because they know that their group's going to be talking about it during the week. And then, of course, the other piece of it is as people invite their friends, their neighbors, their coworkers, and other people that maybe have never darkened the door of your church, then when they're invited to church, they feel like they already know your pastor because they sat in their friend's living room and comfortably, watch these videos, and now they show up to church and now they feel like they already know him or her. Groups will increase serving. I mean, both of these studies say that far more people will serve in a church that are connected into a group than people that are not connected into a group. And it's going to increase giving. One church we work with, I will tell you a story now. It's called Capital Area Christian Church in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. They did 2 back-to-back series last year. They did one right in the new year, one after Easter. And when they compared the first 6 months of 2015 with the first 6 months of 2014, what they discovered, the only noticeable change was that they did these 2 series with the small group curriculum. What they discovered was their attendance had increased by 7.5% over the same 6 months the previous year, and their giving had increased by 7%. And I believe it's in the Transformational Groups book that they say that the average person in a group, or going from not being in a group to being in a group, their giving increases by something like $1,400 a year. And you can go back and look at the book and see. Now let's talk about creating your own curriculum, since that's the reason we gathered here. One of the things, you obviously need to have the people, either staff or volunteer, or if in some cases you have a gap, you can hire somebody. But I would encourage you to look at your staff and your volunteers. I had a church several years ago that I was working with in the Baltimore area, and they paid to have 2 complete curriculum series done. And in the course of that, discovered they had a young man in their church who had graduated from film school. They had someone who had a video production company. They had a man that had won a Crown Award, which is in the Christian world is kind of like an Oscar, for a documentary that he created. I pulled the pastor aside and I said, listen, you've got talented people in your church and you could develop your own curriculum with your people. So I'm not going to take any more of your money to do curriculum for you. If you want me to coach your people on how to develop curriculum, I'd be more than welcome. And they kind of looked at me like I was speaking Chinese because that was not what he counted on me saying. But in your church, you need these rules. You need somebody that can run a camera. And I would recommend at least having 2 cameras, so then you can have, some visual interest by having different shots, but also it makes the editing better. So that way if you have a flub, you can just go back, start over again, and then they could take a little bit from the second camera and then go back to the main camera. But you'll find, people that do videos for their family. You'll find maybe somebody in your church who does wedding videos. Or you may find professional people in your church and you didn't know it before. One church, their videographer was the pastor's 15-year-old son. And so there are a lot of people that have, these kinds of abilities, and they maybe even have their own equipment. And so you don't need to worry about buying equipment or renting equipment, even though those are 2, good options. It could be that people already have equipment and then you can just use it. You need somebody to do video editing, and this may be the person that shoots the video. or it could be somebody else in your church. I've sent out surveys to do assessments of churches, all of the churches I worked with in the last 5 years, and every single one of those assessments came back identifying at a minimum 2 or 3 people in every congregation that had these kinds of skills that they could use for ministry, and they never considered to use it in ministry because nobody had ever asked. You would want to find somebody who could write, and maybe a number of people that could write questions and develop a curriculum writing team that, in addition to creating curriculum for their church, for your church, they could also help with a weekly discussion guide of the message. And you could have curriculum, 52 weeks of the year that people could just download, and there wouldn't be any cost associated with it. You need to find somebody who's a photographer, because it's nice to have some photography, not just have words on a page, but maybe throw in a few pictures. Some people are doing study guides in color, which is great. Others are not doing physical resources anymore, but creating a downloadable discussion guide. And you can have all kinds of color in that, but you got to be careful, because if people are printing out the discussion guide, and you have a lot of pictures in it, you could cost them, $100 in ink. So you don't want to necessarily get into that. But it's good to have a photographer. So the book very much looks like your own, even for the covers, for pictures of the pastors, the other speakers, those sorts of things. Somebody to do graphic design. There are a lot of people with capabilities in graphic design, and they may do this professionally. They may do this freelance. They may have just picked it up on their own. And again, younger people in our churches, these things are very intuitive to them. I mean, I'm to the point anymore where if I need to figure out something on my phone or on my car or whatever, I just turn it over to my 14-year-old son, and he'll figure it out, and he actually discovers things that I never knew the car could do. The last person you want to have is you want to have a project manager. Now, I know what you're thinking, that as a church staff person that you could run this. Well, this is a significant undertaking, and it would be good to have somebody else that would be the point person that would address the details of creating a curriculum so that it doesn't always come back on you. Now, you should have final approval so that something's not being done that's different from what you originally agreed to do. But it's important to have somebody. But here's the cool thing about this. This opens up categories of ministry that your church maybe has never had before. So here's a volunteer role that you could serve in the church by shooting video and editing video and writing and photography and graphic design and project management. I mean, all of these things, it's not just, and I don't want to downplay any role in the church because they're all significant, but some places you feel like, well, unless you can sing or work with kids, then you can be an usher or a parking lot attendant. And all of those roles are significant, but maybe somebody has gifts that they could use in this arena. That would be great. The other thing about surveying a congregation and seeing who has project management ability is that you have a lot of people that self-identify themselves as being leaders. And granted, you don't need a dozen project managers on any project, but you do need leaders in other areas of the church. And so as they identify themselves, then you would go ahead and figure all this out. Now, if you're asking for volunteers in any of these roles, the first thing you would say is who has any interest or ability. The second thing that you would ask is, could you show us a sample of your work? Because we all know, just because you like to sing doesn't mean that you should be part of the worship team. And so, I ask people, send us something that you're the most proud of. And people that do video, they'll have something up on YouTube. And people that write are probably going to have a blog. And people that are photographers or graphic designers are going to have a portfolio. And so you want to vet this a little bit. And do it as a trial run. Say, would you help me on one project? Because number one, they don't have all the time in the world. And number two, if your project manager is difficult to work with, you don't want to make that a permanent position. You want to give it a trial run, and if you go, okay, they did a good job, but boy, there was a lot of drama and that person was hard to work with, well, you can thank them for fulfilling their commitment. You don't have to go back and ask them again. So just word to the wise, I've been there. So you may be saying, okay, my church is not that large, or I don't know if we have these kinds of roles. Well, let me tell you about a church called Dallas Baptist Church in Dallas, Pennsylvania. And this is the picture of their church off of Google. I've never been to Dallas, Pennsylvania. I didn't even know that there was a Dallas, Pennsylvania. Dallas Baptist Church is a church of 50 adults. And they produced their own curriculum with an all-volunteer team. So the roles I just described, videographers, video editors, writers, graphic designers, photographers, project managers, they found volunteers. In fact, Pastor Jerry said in a service, he was saying, okay, now who can do video and who can do writing? And he said the hands just shot up, and he was amazed that in his church of 50 people that he found people with these abilities, either professionally or, just as a hobby, but they did a great job. When they launched their curriculum, they ended up with 100 people gathered into groups. And they had 3 groups that met in a local prison. Now, brace yourself for this one. Pastor Jerry referred to these as their cell groups. Yeah, you knew that was coming. They also had a missionary that that was given a copy of their curriculum that was translating the curriculum into Hindi to be used in churches in India. From a church of 50 people in the middle of nowhere in Pennsylvania. Then they did a second series on top of that. Now you think, okay, so a church of 50 people, what kind of curriculum could they possibly produce? Well, I'll show you. This was the curriculum that they produced. DVD and study guide. And this is my own personal copy, and I took the pictures. The picture's not so great, so don't sign me up to be your photographer. But this is their curriculum, and it's my own personal copy I have in my office, and they did an amazing job. A church of 50 people with all volunteers, because the only staff person is the senior pastor, right? All right, so let's talk about keys to great curriculum. Number one, you need to pick the right topic. I've had churches over the years that say, what are you going to do at the beginning of the year? Well, we start the beginning of the year with an emphasis on fasting, so we're going to do a curriculum on fasting. And I said, well, that's good because the snacks will be very easy. Or I've had churches say, well, we want to do a curriculum on giving, or we want to do a curriculum on evangelism. Well, as you can imagine, for a church-wide kind of alignment or emphasis, those are very difficult topics to tackle. Not that they aren't topics that should be addressed, but they're more kind of topics for people that are already members of your church instead of people that are out in the community. So the more felt needs that you can get with a curriculum, the more influence you'll have in the community for people to gather. So think about what people have questions about or what they need help with. And so everything from time management to relationships, marriage, parenting, a broad number of topics would be things definitely to consider. And the church that wanted to do a curriculum on evangelism, I asked them, I said, what if instead of making a curriculum on evangelism, we made a curriculum that was evangelistic? And so we chose a broader topic of something that people in the area would be interested in. And in there, we gave them the gospel message. In there, we gave them the opportunity. They invited their friends to the group, and then the curriculum basically showed them, how to develop a relationship with Jesus Christ. The other thing with the right topic is you do want to spend time with your senior pastor and hear what is on your pastor's heart. And so even if it's a topic that's not like the perfect thing, the next purpose-driven life or whatever that would draw everybody in, you want to hear where God is leading your pastor in a message series. Because even though the topic may not seem exactly right, it may be more right than you think it is, because that's where God's leading your pastor, and then to develop a curriculum around that. You want to have a proven timeline. And so for a church that has volunteers helping in the roles of, curriculum team like we just described, you want to allow for about 16 weeks. And so if you're going to launch groups, let's say with your own curriculum in September or October of this year, you really want to begin to think about starting in May or June to allow for enough time I'm working with a professional team. The curriculum I showed you earlier that Gene Apple used a couple of years ago off of Easter, we actually developed that whole curriculum from start to finish in 14 days. I don't recommend that. I don't know that I ever want to be in a project that operates at that pace, but it certainly was worth it. But I would say 16 weeks with a volunteer team, it may not take that long, but I would, especially your first time out when everybody's kind of getting to know the process, figure some things out. And there are certain things that you need to think about of, do you need the graphics done ahead of the video shoot so that you can use the graphics in the video shoot? To begin to figure out, okay, what template do we want to use for our curriculum? And all templates have 4 parts. You have an introduction or icebreaker. You have observation questions. What does the text say? You have interpretation questions. What does the scripture mean? And then you have application questions. What am I supposed to do? Well, then that's a fine template. But on the other hand, you need to say, okay, is there something that we could put our church's vision and values into the curriculum and make those headings reflect our church's values? Well, the template can all be decided well in advance of when you start shooting video. And then some people will write curriculum and then shoot the video. I tend to go the other way and shoot the video and then write the curriculum. And the reason for that is the video doesn't change. Because if you write it beforehand and then the person who's presenting gets inspired, they may take the video teaching in a different direction. And then you have to go back and rewrite the curriculum. So once their video is shot, it's not going to change. You also need some tested techniques. There are some people that feel like, I've talked to, I've worked with, that initially they felt like, well, we have a pretty strong production team, so we don't feel like we're going to need a lot of coaching as far as the video and shooting video and all of that sort of stuff. And what you do have to realize is creating small group curriculum is a different genre. It's not the same as shooting video in a service. It's not the same as shooting video for a testimony that you're going to use in the service or for an announcement or whatever else. There is kind of an art and a science to it. And so you want to begin to, you're going to look at other videos. Look at stuff Life Together's done. Look at some of the samples on their website. Look at stuff that Andy Stanley's done. I mean, a variety of people that are out there. And some of it is just available on websites that you can look at for free, but kind of see what they do and how they do it and take notes about all of that. The other thing is, you don't want a 45-minute sermon on a video. You want 10 minutes or less because attention spans are shrinking. If you want to see a great example of a curriculum that'll keep your attention, Doug Field's curriculum, Intentional Parenting, if you go to intentionalparenting.com, there's some samples on there. It's very fast paced. It's very quick moving. I mean, it was very professionally done and they put a lot into it. But it's a beautiful curriculum, and I think it really is kind of getting toward the future as far as keeping people engaged. You also want to have, the scripts together, the template together, like I said, other tools that you're going to need to pull this together. And again, you could find this yourself, or you can use mine if you choose to do that. Your timeline, like I said before, you want to look at starting somewhere in May and then leading up to a launch in the fall. You would launch somewhere around September or October. So I want to share with you a few thoughts about maybe how I can help you and your church when it comes to developing curriculum. Now, I know at this point you're like, oh no, it's the commercial, here we go. But here's the thing. If you'll stick with me to the end of this webinar, I will give you a copy of my project timeline. And this is what I've done with all of the projects and a lot more, the ones that I mentioned today as well as a lot more. And basically you put in the launch date of when you're going to launch the series in your church. And it will populate all of the other dates as far as when you need to shoot, when the writing needs to be done, when you need to get it to your printer, when it's going to come back to your printer, when you need to recruit leaders, when you need to form groups, the whole bit. And so I will give you my timeline, which I probably shouldn't give you, but I'll give you my timeline, get a little bit of the secret sauce today if you'll stick with me to the end. So what I'm doing is I'm forming a group that's going to start in May. It's a 6-month curriculum coaching group. And what we're going to do in the group is we'll cover recruiting your curriculum team, selecting your topics, recruiting your on-camera talent. So you may have somebody who hosts the video, you may have testimonies, you may have training. Obviously, you're going to have someone on there doing teaching, how to do all those different parts, how to choose the right people, logistics for your video shoot. So think through, what are the things you need to have in line? What curriculum do you have available? What curriculum do you maybe need to rent? And renting is not a bad option. Maybe, okay, if you're going to get into this and do this longer term, maybe we need to purchase some equipment. And there's equipment now that I am shocked by how cheap it is relative to, I was saying earlier about, curriculum that costs $25,000 to $75,000. I remember almost 10 years ago working with an organization that paid us $750,000, and we had all these people out of Hollywood and all of these fancy gadgets and things. And the reality now is that you could do the same work with curriculum, with cameras and resources that cost a whole lot less. And it's been amazing to see where technology has gone in all of this. Sample scripts, call sheets, shot sheets, so you know what to shoot, when people are supposed to show up, how to create your own curriculum writing template, and I'd also give you some sample curriculum templates that you can learn from, not copy. A team of experts in every aspect of curriculum production. So when we're on these group calls and you bring your production team in to be part of the call, I'm going to bring somebody in that owns a production company that has developed curriculum like this and have them on the call, because I can answer some of the questions, but when they start geeking it out on equipment and stuff, I'm lost. And so the head of this production company is going to come in and talk to them about what kind of equipment and what to look for and how to set up and what to shoot and the whole bit. Same thing with writing, with graphic design, with all of these different aspects that I have people that I've worked with now for several years that could come in and give some tips on things to do to make your study guide look great, things to do in your video editing, things in writing, the kinds of questions to ask, selecting a printer or duplicator, or things are going more towards streaming online and having downloadable discussion guides, which eliminates the need for DVDs and study guides. I was with a church in Sarasota, Florida a few weeks ago and did a survey of their congregation and found that only 24% of their members were still using DVDs. Now, you have to have DVDs for, certain generations, but they're older than me. But anyway, more and more is going streaming. In fact, there's a lot of churches that were complaining about the curriculum only being available on DVD because they didn't have a DVD player anymore. We'd also talk about how and when to launch your series, how to recruit group leaders, how to form groups, how to support your groups for ongoing success, how to track your groups and measure success. And so in this, the deliverables and bonuses, you would have goal setting and strategic planning for your church. So even though most of this is done as a group, we're still going to look at your church, because what I know is different denominations, different size churches, different cultures, different parts of North America, and I know we have 2 other continents represented today. So Poland, you're going to be different. South America or South Africa, you're going to be different. And so we would do things that were specific for your church based on what you found has worked there and based on things that we've discovered. Executable timelines and support to achieve your goals. Regular teleconferences with other churches and me. We do it over GoToMeeting like this. We'd have the cameras on so we would all get to know each other. And for some people that seems a little bit weird, but the reality is I've been meeting with pastors like this for years. In fact, I have a friend of mine, and I would call him a friend. He's at a church in New York City. I started working with him 5 years ago, and he is a friend, and we have never met in person. But we've met over GoToMeeting and over the phone and over email, and one day we'll meet in person. So we'll have the regular teleconferences twice a month with everybody together, and then you would have a monthly call just with me to begin to work out the specific things that you need to work out for your church. We would have a private Facebook group where everybody could interact with each other, ask questions, answer questions, share experiences. If you develop something, beautiful for your church that helps to recruit people or get people in groups or whatever, we're going to share that so everybody else can see by your example, what we have. You would have lifetime access to the recordings of the group meetings. All the meetings would be recorded, but they're private, so they would be in a Dropbox. They would only be available to the group, but we're going to keep that up. And so you think, well, there was something that I needed. We talked about 3 weeks ago. How can I find that? Well, it'll be in the Dropbox. I would give you tools, samples, intellectual property of how to develop curriculum so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You don't have to go out there and scour everybody else's curriculum and turn it into a science project. It also give you, as it applies, the other chapters of my manuscript for my book before it's released. And when my book's released, I'll give you a copy of my book. The group is going to start in May, and it would be for churches that would want to do a September or October launch, or if you want to think through the process the first time around, and then maybe you're actually going to create something in the fall that you would use in the new year, this would also be a good opportunity for you to join the group. And so some of the bonuses, I have a relationship with Church Teams. If you don't know of churchteams.com, it is the best small group database on the planet, hands down. It's all web-based. Your leaders can update all of their information online. If you haven't heard of Church Teams, learn about Church Teams. If you used to use Church Teams and you don't anymore, you have a different database, you need to repent of your sins and get back to Church Teams because it's an awesome database. So my relationship with Church Teams is that if you sign up as part of my coaching group, they're going to waive your setup fee, which could be, for most churches, is going to be somewhere around $240 to $750. I have one church that just signed up, and their sign-up fee was $1,200, which actually was the majority of what it cost to be in the coaching group. You have lifetime access to my online courses. I'm doing about 6 courses a year. Then our monthly one-on-one consultations. And so the total of these bonuses, and that's giving kind of that middle price, that $480 on Church Teams, would be $2,114. So now you're thinking, oh man, if that's what I'm getting for free, what would I have to pay? All right, so how much does a coaching group cost? I do this actually in 3 different ways. The first is the 6-month coaching group with the monthly one-on-one calls is $1,497 total. The second option would be the 6-month coaching group, like described in option 1, plus when it comes time for your shoot, I would come to your church within the continental U.S. and help to direct your shoot and walk you through it. And so that second option is $3,997. And then the third option would be to do the same thing, but not do it in the group, to work with you individually. I'll also give you the on-site direction, and so we would do the same number of calls, but we would do them one-on-one, and the price for that is $11,997. So if you take the coaching group, which is $1,497, and you use the Church Teams offer, you get the online courses, you get the one-on-ones, so your coaching group is going to cost you negative $671. So what I'm trying to show you here is that if you don't sign up for coaching, you're actually losing money. So, and here's the other piece. You're not losing anything. If you get into this and 30 days in, you go, this is not what I thought it would be. This is not what I want to be a part of. I'll give you your money back. Easy as that. An additional bonus would be this. If you sign up in the next 7 days, so between now and April the 5th, I will do an online church assessment where we would send surveys out to your congregation, to your current group members, to your staff to gather some data. And then we would meet together on GoToMeeting, and I would share the results of that. I just did this for a church in Florida, and they paid me $2,500, and I would give you this for free. It would be delivered online. You would have early access to all of the bonuses in March and April instead of having to wait to May. And so if you add that in, that's a $625 value. So basically, what this comes down to, and maybe I should have cleared this with my wife first because I might get in trouble, is I'm giving you more or less almost $3,000 worth of value for half price. And the truth is, I feel good about that because I don't need to charge a lot of money. I wish I didn't have to charge any money. I wish I could do this all for free. But, I got bills to pay. I got kids to feed. But anyway, I want to give you as much as I can in order to help you and your church prepare. So if this is something, you don't want to go out and spend a lot of money on curriculum. Don't spend $25,000 on one curriculum. Now there's a great curriculum, but don't do that. What you want to do is this. In the coaching group, I will equip you not just to develop one curriculum, but you will be equipped to develop curriculum from now until the Lord comes back. So instead of having one book or one DVD, I'm going to train you to have a printing press, and you can do as many of these as you want. And it's better for your church because it's giving them a second exposure to a message that your pastor preached on the weekend, and now they get to go back and how does this apply to my life? It saves your people money. You're not paying $15, $20 for a study guide. You can have a free downloadable discussion guide with a video on Vimeo, or you can have very low-cost resources to offer your church. So there's a lot of good things about developing something with this process. Now, if you need somebody and think, well, I don't have video people, I don't have writers, I don't have graphic designers, I have people that I would recommend to you. And they would do it for you, but it's still not going to cost you $25,000. All right, so what's your next step? If you're interested in this, you can email me, alan@alanwhite.org, or my cell phone is on there, 949-235-7428 in the United States. And let's talk. So that is the end of my presentation. I appreciate you being with me. And I'm going to open up the mics again, and I will take your questions at this point. So thoughts, questions, things that I should have covered that I didn't cover that maybe I'll cover tomorrow because you brought it up?